The fog clung low over the moors of Coldwater Reach that autumn morning in 1866, rising from the peat-like breath from a dying man's lungs. It was the kind of fog that ate sound, swallowing horse hooves and even the crunch of boots beneath gravel. What little sun could pierce it cast no warmth, only a ghost light, grey and sterile, that made every branch a silhouette and every shadow uncertain. Thomas Penhale, a rail line labourer, had taken the long way home to his cottage near Black Hollow. His shortcut was blocked. A sodden landslip had turned the high path into slurry, and so he walked the edge of the marsh that bordered the long-abandoned Coldwater estate. The estate had once belonged to Dr. Algernon Greaves, a physician of some repute who'd vanished in the final years of the Crimean War. Some said he'd gone to Russia and died. Others said nothing at all. Coldwater's windows had long since rotted shut, its fields overgrown, its glasshouse collapsed into ivy-strangled ruin. Penhale had no interest in legends. He had a bottle of brown gin in one pocket and a half-eaten slab of lard cake in the other. He walked slowly, rubbing his thumb across a worn brass token, something he'd kept since his brother drowned in the ironworks cistern. Ritual, comfort, old habit. Then came the sound. Not of footsteps, nor speech, but a low, dragging wetness, like cloth soaked in broth. Penhale stopped, his mouth open. The fog shifted. Someone emerged from the trees. A woman, or so it first seemed, pale, gown-torn, heavy with mud and threads of red. But her walk, no, her limp, was not human. Her left leg dragged as if broken, the foot turned inward grotesquely. Her right arm hung oddly. When she turned, the face that looked at Penhale did not belong to one person. It was two. Two faces, poorly stitched. One eye blinked, the other did not. One mouth twitched into a low moan, the other sagged open like meat left in the sun. Her scalp had a seam running from temple to nape, and tufts of dark and blonde hair struggled beneath it. Penhale did not scream. He simply dropped his gin and ran. By the time the constable arrived, 1 Miles Garthwaite of the North Riding Division, the figure had vanished. But Penhale's story spread quickly. By dusk, 12 people claimed to have seen the joined woman. 3 insisted she walked the marsh paths nightly. One boy, Reuben Hale, said he saw her digging in the marsh with a silver-handled spade. Garthwaite, a man of moderate temperament and terrible eyesight, did not believe in ghosts. But the next morning, he returned to Coldwater Estate with 2 deputies and a dog. The fog had lifted slightly. The air held that sour autumn chill, wet wool, peat, rusting iron. They found it near the rear glasshouse wall, the body, or rather, what remained of it, buried shallow, as if in a rush. No coffin. The cloth was damp canvas, wrapped crudely in rope. Garthwaite knelt and pulled it back with his gloved hand. Hands. The body had been cut and sewn. 2 female torsos, joined with blackened sutures at the side. A left arm that did not match the shoulder. A face that bore the unmistakable outline of surgical tampering. The needle marks were precise, but the flesh had died badly, bruised and weeping. No name, no identification, no shoes. Only one item on the body. A brass hospital token sewn into the waist lining, stamped with the words, Greaves, Patient File 47A, hold until cleared. They carried the body to the vestry morgue in 3 separate sacks. The town doctor, Elias Partridge, vomited twice before covering it with a shroud. The local paper printed only a single paragraph. A most foul and troubling remains was discovered on the Greaves property by labourer Thomas Penhale. Due investigation is underway, but the rumours were louder. Some said the body was stitched from the corpses of Coldwater's missing girls, Agnes Tell, Louisa Merrick, and one of the Flannery twins. Others claimed it wasn't dead when found, that it whispered to Penhale as it collapsed. Reuben Hale began drawing pictures at school, charcoal images of women with too many limbs, too many eyes. One sketch showed a hand sewn into a stomach like a third arm. Penhale himself refused to speak further. He left town a week later, saying he'd received word from his brother, the same brother who had drowned 6 years ago. That November, a letter arrived at the local police station. It was unsigned, the ink trembling, the parchment warped from moisture. The only legible line read, "He is not dead. The doctor lives beneath the house. He still takes what he needs." Back at Coldwater Estate, Constable Garthwaite returned with a spade and 2 men from the city. They searched for a cellar, a crawl space, an entrance to something hidden. They did not find a laboratory, but they did find stairs. Brick stairs covered in earth and old timber, leading beneath the north wing of the house. They sealed it shut by order of the mayor. Officially, nothing more was said. Unofficially, the town of Coldwater Reach began its descent into fear. The fog lingered for 4 more days after the discovery at Coldwater Estate. It pooled in the gullies and crept beneath doorframes, as if the land itself had begun to exhale secrets long buried. The townspeople of Coldwater Reach did not speak of the stitched corpse in public, but the silence was not absence. It was compression, holding gossip tightly in kitchens, in the backs of butcher shops, and beneath pews during morning prayer. At Hale's Tailor and Millinery on High Street, Mrs. Dorcas Quill was the first to say what others only feared. "It weren't 1 body, but 3. I seen the seams myself. Agnes Tell had a mole on her collarbone. I saw it. That stitch ran right through it." She spoke this not to the constable, nor the mayor, but to the baker's wife, while pinning lace to a wedding veil. By dusk, the baker's daughter had relayed it to 4 classmates, one of whom fainted in catechism. The grocer, Mr. Eben Ford, dismissed it all with a huff and a long drag on his clay pipe. "Penhales touched in the head," he said. "Too much fog and gin. You'd see monsters too if you drank turpentine and slept in your boots." But even he began bolting the cellar doors each evening and placed a coal shovel by the back stair. Father Swithin, the Anglican rector of St. Elphin's, made no mention of the event from the pulpit, but his sermon on November 12th included an unusual passage from the Apocrypha, read in a trembling voice. "He made men into things not fit for naming, and he wept not once, and their limbs rose not in glory, but in horror." Children were not allowed to walk home alone after dusk. The blacksmith's youngest daughter, Isabel, said she'd heard humming near the Coldwater hedge, a lullaby in 2 voices, out of tune with itself. No one laughed. 3 miles from the town centre, in a stone cottage rented from the widow Cleary, Dr. Elias Partridge sat at his writing desk, hands wrapped around a tin cup of brandy. His fingers still bore faint stains from the embalming oil used during the corpse examination. He had not spoken of what he saw, not to his wife, not to the constable, not even to Father Swithin, whose silent glances had grown heavier with each passing morning. But in the second drawer of his desk, under a book of Latin prescriptions and a broken locket, he placed a page torn from his medical ledger. It read, "November 6th, 1866. The stitching is surgical, no question. Fine sutures, black wax thread, rib cartilage joined clean across 2 female torsos. Brain cavity appears tampered. Ear canal sealed with beeswax. Small brass disc sewn beneath left scapula. File 47A. Markings consistent with asylum identification. Alive. Post-mortem tampering is likely, but certain signs of struggle in tissue. Hemorrhaging not entirely explained. No records match this patient number. Query: was there ever a sanctioned asylum under Greaves? Must locate documentation. He did not sign it." On the 8th of November, Constable Miles Garthwaite summoned the town council. 5 men sat in the draughty library of the old magistrates' hall, oak panels covered in dust, and portraits of former mayors glowering from the walls. Mayor Radley, stooped and sour-faced, spoke little. His concern was not moral, but political. "We cannot have London papers nosing about," he said. "You know how these things spread. If there's no name, there's no scandal. Let the estate rot." But Reverend Jonah Pritchard, the Methodist preacher, disagreed. "There are girls gone, and names whispered. You think folk will sleep while their daughters sew veils in windows and fear the tap at night? We owe them more than silence." The council agreed only on one point. No formal notice would be posted, but Reverend Pritchard would be permitted to inquire discreetly among parish records and the Cold Water deed archives, an act they hoped would both quiet his conscience and distract him from public outcry. In the records room beneath the vestry, Pritchard lit a whale oil lamp and examined the deed transfers dating back to 1839. The Greaves property had passed from the baronetcy to Dr. Algernon Greaves in 1848, after a fire claimed his parents in London. Greaves had returned from his studies in Edinburgh with honours in surgery, chemistry and, strangely, liturgical law. There, pressed between two receipts for coal delivery, Pritchard found a map. Cold Water Estate, 1852, drawn in red ink, unusual, hand-labelled. The house footprint was expected, but beneath it, a second level. Not labelled cellar or vault, but rather patient quarters, south wing substructure. Beside it, a strange sigil, a serpent curled into a spiral, mouth open. Back in town, whispers became more than whispers. Sarah Bettridge, a former laundry maid at Cold Water, confessed, quietly, shamefully, to the apothecary's widow that Dr. Greaves once had visitors who did not leave. Girls mostly, she said. Young, poor, not from here. They came in through the west gate. I never saw them go out. She mentioned strange tasks, laundering linen stained yellow and pink, burning old dolls in the orchard furnace, delivering food to the cellar door, but never receiving empty trays in return. She left after 3 weeks. He was always humming, she said, but never the same song twice. Sometimes it weren't even music. The widow told no one for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she awoke to find her cellar door pried open, though the lock was unbroken. On the 4th, she boarded it shut with 6 iron nails. Cold Water Reach, by the 3rd week of November, had become a town suspended in its own breath. No official curfew was declared, but the streets emptied early. Lamps were lit in windows before dusk. The butcher began locking his shop from the inside. Father Swithin stopped speaking at all during supper. The fog returned once more. But this time, it did not bring silence. It brought humming. 2 voices. Not in unison. And always, always, just behind the hedge. The Greaves name had once drawn admiration in medical circles, particularly in Yorkshire and parts of Edinburgh. By the mid-1840s, Dr. Algernon Greaves had contributed to at least 4 published journals on the subject of cranial trauma and nerve responsiveness. His 1846 paper in The Lancet on autonomic expression in the dead was seen as morbid but pioneering. Yet by 1854, his correspondence ceased entirely. No further papers, no lectures, no notices in medical colleges. The town assumed he had withdrawn into grief after his sister's death. But there was no sister, no burial recorded, no baptismal mention. Not in Cold Water Reach, not in Edinburgh, not even in London where the Greaves estate once stood before fire, claimed his parents' lives. Yet the staff remembered her, or something like her. Her name was Evelyn, they said. She was never listed on the Cold Water payroll, never received a tithe, never attended parish service. And yet multiple accounts described her presence in the estate's upper floors during the 1850s. She was pale, wore gloves in the bath, said Mags Hedderwick, a former scullery maid, now senile and living with her son in Barrowfell. She'd sit on the banister like a cat, never made a sound when she walked. Records from a brief inquest in 1858, sealed in the town registry, now cracked with mould, referenced a young female dependent living on the property, though her relation to Dr. Greaves was described as non-familial and informal. Yet her presence clearly mattered. A surviving inventory from the estate's 1855 linen order lists a peculiar note. 12 gowns, mourning style, small, black silk, custom buttons, monogram e.g. Filed under, laboratory sundries, not personal effects. That same year, the Greaves estate ordered 15 yards of stitched lambskin and 30 brass bindings typically used for orthopaedic strapping. The supplier, Fenwick Medical Trade of Manchester, tagged the request as non-standard, no hospital account on file. An 1862 letter, preserved in brittle folds in the county archives, addressed from Greaves to a supplier in Whitby, reads, The subject requires greater spatial orientation in confined bodywork. External appendages have regrown with imperfect structure. Would request instruments thinner than standard, long-handled, curved at the elbow joint. Perhaps like those in pediatric spinal reconstruction. No instruction sheets needed. I've adapted my own schema. It is not signed. It is stamped with the Greaves estate seal. A serpent biting its tail, overlaid with the words Veritas sub carnem, truth beneath flesh. The groundskeeper of Coldwater at the time, a mute named Joel Barlow, is mentioned in 2 police reports regarding trespassers near the estate. In one, dated April 13th, 1860, the description reads, "Subject claimed to have been chased by a girl with black eyes and sewn lips near the West Orchard. No such person was found, but a small trail of stitched muslin was recovered, tangled in barbed hedge. No further action taken. Barlow himself kept a notebook. Now in the possession of his great-nephew, it contains crude drawings, headless dolls, bird cages with limbs hanging from them, a wheelbarrow filled with stitched fabric resembling skin. On one page, dated simply Sabbath, is a rough diagram of a girl's face, split vertically. On the left side, a normal human eye. On the right, only a stitched socket. In the margin is written, she watches, he listens. They hurt when they're apart. No one knows who they refers to." Father Swithin, after reading the documents brought forward by Reverend Pritchard, remarked quietly to the town doctor, "If there was a sister, she was made, not born." Partridge did not reply. But the following morning, he filed a request to speak with the asylum record keepers in York, asking for files related to patients transferred or discharged between 1849 and 1855 under special license. One reply came back 2 weeks later. No record of patient 47A, nor of a Greaves-associated facility. No license granted under that name. However, one application was submitted in 1853 under the alias A. Gallard for anatomical experimentation, rejected by council. The attic of Coldwater Estate had long been considered unsafe, but when Reverend Pritchard and Constable Garthwaite returned to the property after uncovering the basement steps, they brought a locksmith and a carpenter. The attic door was triple locked, though the hinges had rusted nearly through. Inside they found a small cot with restraints sewn into the mattress, a vanity table with no mirror, but a series of pencil sketches tacked where the glass would be, each showing a face, some male, some female, all slightly different but connected by common scars, a wooden recorder, a child's flute, beside a bowl of wax figures with mismatched limbs. And in the farthest corner, behind a moth-eaten tapestry, a single pair of leather boots, child-sized, stitched together at the sole. One letter remained, folded inside the pocket of a dress slung over the cot. It read, "I heard her humming again. The one they don't know. She hums to me through the seam. She says we'll be made better next time. Whole. Perfect." He said it too, but he always lies. He says if I dream hard enough, I can be both. No date, no recipient, only the smell of dried lavender and iron. The town's elderly now speak of Evelyn as if she were folklore, not memory. A figure glimpsed from second-story windows. A girl who never aged, who never truly walked the town but was seen by everyone at least once. Some say she died in the house. Others claim she escaped, half herself, half something else. One child, playing by the marsh, claimed to find a glove with no hand inside, but it moved on its own when touched. Mrs. Quill, the milliner, told a travelling lace merchant that she once saw a girl with Evelyn's hair colour dragging a bundle of dolls behind her. "The dolls were crying," she said, "but their mouths were stitched shut." When asked if she might have imagined it, she replied, "No." It's the forgetting that comes after that makes it feel like imagination. The figure seen by Thomas Penhale in the fog had one green eye and one brown. Evelyn Greaves, if she existed, was said to have heterochromia. One photograph remains, blurred and faded, taken with an 1851 collodion plate by a travelling portraitist from Lancaster. It shows Dr. Algernon Greaves in a dark waistcoat, unsmiling. Behind him, just barely visible behind the parlour curtains, is a young girl, or part of one. The first truly public event occurred on the 21st of November, 1866, under a sky the colour of spoiled milk and with air that smelled of old bread and burning hair. It happened in the schoolhouse, a modest timber-frame building that stood where the parish stable had once been. The incident was brief, but it would fracture what little comfort remained in Coldwater Reach. It began with a child's voice, and it ended in silence that refused to lift. The lesson that morning had been Latin recitation. 10 pupils, ranging from age 6 to 14, stood in 2 uneven rows, stammering through declensions. The schoolmaster, Mr. Langford Quince, was known for his stern temper but fair discipline. According to the 2 elder pupils interviewed later, Quince had just finished correcting a boy's pronunciation of service when Liza Bell, aged 9, began to speak. Only it was not Latin, and it was not her voice. The room froze. Quince turned slowly. The other children, by later accounts, said her eyes had rolled upward, not in faint, but in focus. She was staring at something in the ceiling no one else could see. The voice that came from her was deeper than her own, guttural but fluid. Witnesses claimed it spoke in full sentences, though the grammar was confused. Something about the wet seams and the meat mirror. One boy wept. Then she screamed, a scream so loud and ragged it snapped the inkwell glass on the master's desk. She collapsed. Blood leaked from both ears. She remained unconscious for 4 hours. When she awoke, she did not remember the event, but she asked why her hands were the wrong shape. The town doctor, Elias Partridge, recorded the episode in his private log, not in the public register. His notes included this entry: vocal range inconsistent with patient's anatomy. No prior history of trance, delirium or fits. Pupils dilated unevenly. One nostril weeping wax. Vocal cords inflamed. No sign of fever. Fever would not cause ink glass rupture. Later that week, Partridge sent a telegram to his former lecturer in Edinburgh, requesting clarification on historical cases of glossolalia, post-epileptic fugue, and spirit possession. He received no reply. The telegram office said the wires out of Coldwater had begun misfiring, metal shrieks, as they described it, just after midnight that same day. 3 nights later, a fire erupted in the northern barn of the Flannery farmstead. No horses were lost, but the hayloft collapsed inward, smouldering for nearly an hour before the town bucket line could reach it. The strange thing, as recorded by Constable Garthwaite, was the fire's nature. The heat was backward. The outer wood remained intact. The inner stone blackened, hay unburnt on top but scorched underneath. Smelled not of smoke, but of boiled leather and sulphur soap. The barn's iron crossbeam cracked clean in half, split as if by extreme cold, not flame. The only object found at the epicenter was a doll, stuffed with lamb's wool, eyes sewn from mismatched buttons, and inside its chest, instead of stuffing, a single brass disc stamped EG. It was warm to the touch for hours afterward. The fire was ruled combustive by cause unknown. But rumours had already taken root. The widow Cleary insisted the fire had followed a sound, like humming again, but this time accompanied by soft scratching on her window shutters. It wasn't claws, she said. It were fingernails. Clumsy. Too many. At the same time, another report reached Father Swithin, this time from the sacristan at St. Elphin's, who had been tasked with polishing the brassware for the Sunday service. He claimed to find the altar cross turned upside down, not by accident, by design. The threads holding it to the draped cloth had been carefully unpicked and resewn, not roughly, but with surgical precision, tied in a looping pattern that, when flattened, resembled an anatomical diagram. The spinal cord and branching nerves. On the morning of November 26th, Reverend Jonah Pritchard took it upon himself to open the sealed staircase beneath Coldwater Estate. He did not request official permission. He brought no men, only his lantern and his journal. He did not return for 6 hours. When he did, his coat was stained at the cuffs, and the right heel of his boot was missing. He said nothing during supper. His wife later reported that he burned his clothes in the hearth that night and refused to speak until dawn. But his journal preserved the facts. Basement entrance appears to descend farther than expected. 74 steps lined in slate, smells of chalk, oil and formalin. Several rooms, stone walls, brick archways, scratches on door frames, 4 lines vertical, 1 across. Prison tally or marking system. One room contained a vat, cylindrical, brass-rimmed, about 4 feet deep, smelled of brine and iron, drained, bottom engraved with serpent sigil and phrase corpus non terminus. Found remnants of leather straps, buckled, screws in the stone floor, found a shelf of glass jars, contents cloudy. One broken, fluid evaporated, smell, vinegar and ash. Inside jar, segment of human ear, joined to something else, possibly animal cartilage. Cannot be sure I heard breathing. Not mine. Pritchard ended the entry with a quote from the Psalms. They sacrificed their sons and daughters to demons, and the land was desecrated by their blood. That Sunday, no one sat in the first 3 pews at St. Elphin's. Children began covering their mirrors with blankets. 2 families left town before Christmas, citing illness in the north as the reason. But no one believed them. Perhaps the most chilling revelation came not from the estate or the church, but from a piece of music. A lullaby. An old nursery song, half forgotten, called Stitch Me Whole. It was discovered by accident when Mr. Langford Quince, the schoolmaster, overheard one of his students humming it beneath his breath. The lyrics, when pressed from the boy, were strange. Thread me from the garden bones, knit my legs with father's groans, stitch me lips and stitch me eyes, make me perfect, silence cries. Quince, disturbed, asked where he had learned it. The boy said Evelyn sang it to him in a dream. Only Evelyn's name had not been spoken in the classroom for weeks, and the boy could not recall dreaming. A final entry from Dr. Elias Partridge, dated November 30th, reads, I no longer believe this is disease, nor fugue, nor madness in the air. Something has been made here, and it is unfinished. That is the part I fear most. He burned his journal 2 days later. But the pages quoted here had already been copied by his assistant. She died in the spring, but the copy remains, filed in the town archive, under unclassified phenomena. The last week of November 1866 marked the threshold. What had been whispers, private suspicions, and oddities buried under British reserve now bloomed into something more dangerous. Fear, raw and public. The kind that grew legs, the kind that made people act. It began with the bells. At precisely 3:17 a.m. on November 28th, the bells of St. Elphin's tolled 4 times. No one had touched the rope. The sacristan swore, under oath, that the tower door had been locked and sealed, bolted from within. And yet the bells rang clear, cutting through the fog with notes not usually heard in that order. G-D-D-C, not a call to worship, a dirge. By sunrise, 7 townspeople had reported dreams of a woman, or a child, or perhaps both, walking through their homes, trailing thread. Each dream ended the same way. They awoke unable to speak for several minutes. One man, Amos Kettle, a tanner by trade, never spoke again. He died 3 days later, throat intact, tongue uncut. But the inside of his mouth was sewn shut with black waxed thread. Dr. Partridge, now sleeping in the back room of his surgery with the windows nailed closed, refused to sign a death certificate. He instead wrote a private note to Constable Garthwaite. This is not a contagion of body. It is contagion of memory. Something lost has been rethreaded into us. The note was burned, but the constable copied the phrase in his own hand before tossing it into the fire. He began drinking more. Meanwhile, a child vanished. 6-year-old Nora Adelwhite was last seen on the morning of November 29th, skipping along the cobbled lane toward Mrs. Hensby's bakery with a halfpenny tied in her handkerchief. She never arrived. Witnesses said she turned the corner past Hale's tailor
and then simply wasn't there. Her bonnet was found later that evening, floating in the parish well. But what disturbed the townsfolk most wasn't the missing child. It was what was found beneath the bonnet. A second handkerchief stitched to the underside, containing 5 objects: a button, a lock of braided hair, 2 distinct shades, a tooth not yet adult, a scrap of parchment bearing
the serpent's sigil, and a scrap of cloth embroidered with the words, "Next must match." The embroidery thread was red, but not dye, confirmed by Dr. Partridge to be human blood, deoxygenated, likely venous. That evening, a meeting was held in the town square, not in the chapel, not in the magistrates' hall, outside, in the cold, lamplight flickering against fog. Mayor Radley tried to maintain order but was shouted down. People demanded action. Some wanted to raze Coldwater Estate to the ground. Others insisted it was already too late. That the house was not the cause, but merely the mouth. That whatever Greaves had opened now fed elsewhere. Reverend Pritchard stood quietly, gripping a folded sheaf of paper. When pressed to speak, he simply read a line he had found scrawled on the back of the Coldwater map, previously unnoticed. Every seam leaks, eventually. There was no vote. But the fire was set the next day. It did not burn, despite dry wood, despite pitch, despite prayers and curses and 27 gallons of lamp oil. The Coldwater Estate remained intact. Only the grass died, and one boy, who had stood too near the hedge, was found with blood coming from his nose and both eyes. He survived, but never went near stitched cloth again. The town's turning point came not from the church, nor the schoolhouse, nor even the estate, but from a modest boarding house on Crowbell Lane. There lived Miss Eleanor Finch, spinster, former midwife, and known in town for speaking her mind and making an excellent ginger pudding. Miss Finch had been quiet for weeks, withdrawn. Neighbours assumed she was unwell. But on December 1st, just after sunset, she stepped into the square with something bundled in a sheet. She said nothing, simply unwrapped it. Inside, a doll, made from stitched leather, tanned not with cowhide, but pigskin by the smell. The arms were jointed with brass pins. The head was ceramic. But the eyes, one brown glass, one green, were clearly salvaged from taxidermy kits. She said, in a voice no one had heard her use before, "It watches me, but not as it once did. It wants a new place now. It's learning to change shape." Then she placed it gently on the ground, turned, and walked to the edge of the square. She collapsed before reaching her doorstep. Dead before her body hit the cobbles. The doll vanished during the chaos. That night, Father Swithin did not attend prayers. Instead, he took a carriage to the county record house in Barrowfell. He requested access to all records of institutional license, asylum applications, and experimental treatment notes from the years 1849 to 1860. He found one unsigned application. It bore no name, but had 3 attachments. A drawing of a restraint bed with modular joints, a formula for a nerve-deadening serum involving laudanum and belladonna, and a single phrase written on the cover letter, "What God separated at birth, let reason reunite in flesh." He returned to a Coldwater Reach by dawn. By dusk, he had bricked shut the chapel's organ loft and nailed a parchment to the church doors that simply read, "Trust not the face you knew, nor the name you remember." On December 3rd, snow fell, early and thick. It blanketed the town in silence, but the humming did not stop. Now it came from within walls. Children heard it behind the plaster. One girl claimed it sang her name backwards. One man swore the string of his coat looped itself into the serpent symbol while he slept. A dog refused to eat, then tore open its own underbelly. Partridge sedated 4 patients in one day for fevered hallucination, though none had a raised temperature. Reverend Pritchard refused to speak at funerals. The constable no longer went near the estate, and the bell stopped ringing, even by rope. One final note from this phase of Coldwater Reach's descent comes from the widow Cleary. In a letter to her sister dated December 4th, she wrote, They've begun digging near the orchard. I see boys with dirt on their lips. They won't answer when I call, but they hum. And one of them, I think he has Evelyn's hands. The letter was intercepted at the post office. Its envelope had been sewn shut, with black waxed thread. The snow that fell over Coldwater Reach in December of 1866 did not behave like ordinary snow. It did not soften sound. It seemed to carry it, amplifying every groan of timber, every rustle of curtains, every distant humming. The townsfolk spoke of it in whispers, as if the snow itself could overhear. And perhaps it could. For in its quiet presence, something old began to surface, not from the earth, but from the paper and ink left behind by those who should have known better. The story had always focused on Dr. Algernon Greaves, but Coldwater's roots extended further, back into provincial memory, into the forgotten ink ledgers of clerks long since buried. And it was there, in one of those clerks' brittle notebooks, found in the cellar of the Barrowfell Records House, that the first fracture in history was discovered. The ledger, dated 1835, belonged to Merritt Elwyn, a junior notary under the jurisdiction of the West Riding Medical Registrar. Elwyn's job was mundane: recording requests for burial, transferal of anatomical specimens, and requisitions from rural practices. But entry number 772, located between two requests for quinine shipments, read as follows: Received application from Mr. A. Greaves, L. de Terme, of Wexley by Holt, requesting formal exemption to conduct experimental bodywork under Royal Dissection License. Notes imply use of dual corpse amalgamation for study of nerve pathway reactivation. Request denied. Application attached to blacklist file for breach of decorum. Two things stood out. First, this was not Algernon Greaves, but a prior A. Greaves. No record existed of a father, but the family line had clearly touched these practices before. Second, the request was dated March 12, 1835, exactly 31 years to the day before the first stitched body was found at Coldwater Estate. Father Swithin, informed of this by Reverend Pritchard, who now refused to step foot in the chapel, took the liberty of requesting the blacklist file from the county coroner's office. He received a thin envelope, bound with red string and marked Pre-Victorian Anatomic Rejections. Inside was a letter, folded 3 times, edges singed. It read, "To study the seam is not to disrespect creation. It is to understand the path back into it. The hand remembers even when separated from the arm. The tongue may sing with any throat if stitched in place before rot sets in. We do not mutilate. We restore." It was signed simply, A.G., the Elder. In the margin, written in a different hand, perhaps a reviewer, were the words, "Utter perversion, godless science." In the same archive box, a smaller note had been misfiled. A child's drawing, undated, on yellowed linen. It showed a tree with no branches, only limbs, human limbs, arms for roots, legs for boughs, and above it, in stitched red thread, home. Meanwhile, back in Coldwater, a further discovery changed everything. In the ruined greenhouse behind the estate, partially unearthed by melting snow, was a rusted filing cabinet. Inside, preserved in layers of oilcloth, were 12 folders, each labelled Integration Journal with sequential numbers. The earliest, Journal 1, A, Subject Evelyn. The latest, Journal 12. C, Subject V, F. No full names. Each file contained diagrammatic sketches, some bordering on anatomical madness, backs open to expose spinal cords, eyes marked with arrows for graft removal, limbs mapped for fusion alignment. Each file included a list of mismatches. A sample entry, Subject 4, B, arms incompatible, adult male, juvenile female. Vocal cords rejected at week 2, seizure response, non-terminal. Recommend burial in Orchard Lot 3 if pain persists. Other notes use phrases like adjust temperament via cranial symmetry and dream sequence instability. And always, somewhere on the page, the symbol of the serpent. But one file, Journal 7D, had something no others did, a folded letter, sealed with wax, not broken. Its contents read, "My beloved Evelyn has crossed too far." Her tissue weeps even when dry. She hums even in the waking world now. But I cannot unmake her. I will not. She is not defective. She is not a mistake. She is the first to remember, the others will follow. One day, we will all be one again. Reverend Pritchard, upon reading the files, took to the bell tower and rang the iron for 1 hour, breaking the silence of weeks. When confronted by townspeople, he said only, he was not trying to raise the dead. He was trying to replace the living. Following this, the church archives were re-examined by Garthwaite and the schoolmaster Quince, who had taken to sleeping with a hammer beside his bed. There, in the 1857 vestry ledger, they found a list of confessions marked "Private, not for public penance." Entry number 4 read, "I dream of voices stitched into a choir. Each voice has my sister's breath. I do not dream as a man should. I am not alone inside myself. Anonymous parishioner." And entry number 9. "He says the face doesn't matter. He says I'll forget the pain once it's properly aligned." Both confessions were traced back to men long dead, but both were signed in trembling script with the initials VF, the same as the final subject file in the Integration Journal. Subject VF. In the days following these discoveries, the fog returned. But this time, it did not lie low. It crept high, up the windows, curling over chimneys, pressing flat against glass as if watching. And as it thickened, the snow beneath it did not melt. It grew, spread, and hardened into ridged patterns, stitch-like seams across the cobbled streets. When broken, they bled a dark brine from beneath. The constable recorded one final incident before the town registry closed its 1866 records with a blank page. He wrote of an attempt to exhume the Orchard burial site suspected to contain Subject 4B. But as the team approached with spades and lanterns, the ground beneath them shifted, not caved, but pulsed, as if breathing. The constable's last line reads, "We did not dig. The soil moved of its own accord, sewing shut the holes as we made them." He resigned that night. His badge was left on the church altar, stitched to a child's dress. The child has never been identified. On the night of December 11th, 1866, the final candle was extinguished in Coldwater Reach. The event was never officially recorded. No court testimony, no press article, no coroner's inquest. Only a scattering of fragmented letters, half-filled journals, and the memory of the snow, falling too slowly, like feathers from something slaughtered high above. What happened that night has been reconstructed from 5 surviving accounts, each one contradictory in detail, but identical in one chilling truth. Something was born beneath Coldwater Estate, or worse, something returned. Fragment 1. The Glass Diary of Miss Ruth Ellicott, schoolmistress, age 44. December 11th, 7:03 p.m. The fog inside the house is thicker than outside. It clings to the windows but does not wet them. My lantern casts no shadow. I have nailed all mirrors shut and stacked the hymnals into the hearth. Something is singing under the floorboards. It knows my name. It knows how I used to stutter as a girl. It's inside that memory. How does it know? Page torn, edges burned. Fragment 2. Constable Garthwaite's final entry, found pinned to church pew with surgical needle. We lit 12 lanterns, took iron, rope and salt, descended into Coldwater's south wing basement. We followed the stitch lines in the stone. They weren't cracks, they were seams, and they were wet. One deputy touched the wall. It pulsed. Then Evelyn spoke, not from the hall, but through it. Her voice came from every direction, like a child buried in multiple throats. We reached the integration room. That's what the ledger called it. There was no table, just something, massive, heaving, threaded with brass and veins and voices, and eyes, so many, blinking at different rhythms. The walls were covered in stitched cloth. skin, not tanned, still alive. She sang, "All the parts remember, all the mouths forgive, all the hands can build again." No body was ever found, only the needle, still warm. Fragment 3, Reverend Pritchard's letter to Father Swithin, never sent. The serpent was never a symbol of evil here. It was an instruction, a blueprint. Dr. Greaves believed the body could outlive identity, could be rewoven with others into a perfect speaking vessel. Evelyn was not his sister. Evelyn was his prototype. She was made, not born, and she was made to hold more than one soul. She sang because she had to. The humming was not madness. It was memory echoing through unmatched lungs. We thought he was creating a monster, but he was trying to build a community inside a single skin. The envelope was stitched shut. The stitching matched that used on patient 4B. Fragment 4, postmarked from nearby Wexley, unsigned. We saw them walking at dawn, 12 figures, not quite right, some tall, some bent, all wrong in their joints, but all moving in synchrony, like puppets under one breath. One had too many knees. Another's mouth opened sideways. They walked toward the orchard, humming. No one stopped them. Not even the dogs. Fragment 5. Recovered wax cylinder audio, transcribed by historian Walter Kirk, 1952. Low humming. Rhythmic, mechanical, childlike. Then, voice 1. Whisper, female. I was Evelyn. Then I was Agnes. Then I was Tell. Now I am all voice 2, male, cracking. It took so long, so many mistakes, but they forgive me now, unintelligible clicking, wet sounds. Then final voice, deep, layered, impossibly wide. We will remember you, and you will become us. When the thread finds you, the cylinder cracked after playback. It was stored in a lead box, which rusted within days. By the morning of December 12th, Coldwater Reach no longer existed in the railway records. The December 15th edition of the Northern Gazetteer listed the town as vacated for cholera containment. No such quarantine had been issued. A map printed the following year showed an open moor where the town once stood. The name Coldwater Reach was erased, not redacted, unstitched. Only one house remained untouched by snow. The Cleary boarding house. It still stands today, but its mirrors have never reflected correctly. One visitor in 1911 claimed her reflection blinked after she had turned away. Another said he saw thread coiled beneath the wallpaper, twitching when prayers were spoken aloud. The basement is sealed, but the boards shift sometimes. From below, there is no gravestone for Dr. Algernon Greaves, no certified death record, no documented next of kin. His estate was never formally seized, and no will was filed in the ecclesiastical courts. By Victorian legal standards, he simply vanished, absorbed into a fog of bureaucratic silence. Yet Coldwater Reach, the town he inhabited, and some would say created, did not disappear without a trace. Its name may have been struck from the maps, its roads repurposed under false parish labels. But the archives remained, scattered, misfiled, burned and then recopied by cautious hands. And from those ashes, a faint outline has emerged. A story, perhaps, or something closer to a warning. The earliest post-event inquiry came from a minor clerk in London, Edward M. Paxton, who in January 1867 attempted to trace an unpaid physician's license renewal. The name was Greaves, the address, Coldwater Estate. He received no reply, but a bundle arrived at his desk 1 week later, no return mark, no accompanying note. Inside were 7 items, a page torn from the Lancet, annotated in red, a child's bonnet with black thread stitching the inner hem, a small brass disc engraved Subject 12, C, a photograph of an orchard with depressions in the soil, not graves, but sutures, a prayer card with the face of St. Cecilia, scratched out a cotton glove stitched closed at the fingertips, and a letter, unsigned. When the voice returns, bury your mirrors and burn your thread. Do not speak her name. She has learned to multiply through memory. Paxton quit his post within the month. He died in 1872 of unknown causes. His autopsy report contains a single, haunting note from the attending examiner. Trachea and soft palate show signs of internal stitching. No external wound visible. The next to investigate was not a clerk, nor a reverend, nor a doctor. It was Sarah Veal, an amateur folklorist and collector of orphan songs. She visited the Wexley area in 1891, searching for regional ballads. There, she documented a rhyme sung by local children who, notably, did not know where it came from. Her journal records the full verse. "Mama stitched my elbows wrong, Papa sang me backwards. Now I wear my sister's knees and dream of orchard pastures. If the wind should hum your name, don't hum back or follow. She will thread your thoughts with hers and sew you into sorrow." When asked about the lyrics, one boy simply replied, "She lives in the gaps." Between old names, Veal left abruptly. Her final note, hastily scribbled in a train margin, reads, "They sing it like prayer, and they never blink when they do." In 1914, a trench engineer stationed in northern France discovered a small metal box embedded in the wall of a ruined farmhouse. Inside were charred documents, including what appeared to be a Coldwater parish list, though the names were rearranged in a strange spiral format. At the centre, Evelyn, many hands. Below it, Agnes, sings through two mouths. Tell, lives in the skin folds. Louisa, remembers the orchard. Subject VF awake. The engineer was never able to explain how this box, marked with the seal of an English rural parish, ended up inside the wall of a French dwelling untouched by British hands. He sent the file to a colleague at the British Museum. It was lost in transit. In 1933, during a restoration of a railway station outside Barrowfell, workers uncovered an old tunnel. Cobblestone, damp, never marked on any plan. The workers opened the collapsed end and found a row of boots. Children's boots. But none were pairs. Each was sewn sole to sole with a matching from another child's size. Inside one boot was a folded page from a hymnal. The music was distorted, the notation irregular, but the title read clearly, "Chorale for the Unfinished." The boots were sealed behind stone by order of the local council. Two of the workers later reported hearing humming from beneath the floorboards of their cottages. One took his own life. The other moved to Australia and refused to speak of the job again. In 1964, a doctoral student named Nora Delbridge at the University of Leeds discovered a misfiled set of letters in the personal papers of a retired pathologist. Among them, a torn autopsy sketch, bearing no official seal, depicting a fused ribcage with two hearts stitched side by side, one collapsed, the other marked with an E. Delbridge, after tracing the handwriting, connected it to Dr. Elias Partridge, long presumed mad, then disappeared entirely by 1870. She submitted her findings for peer review. 2 weeks later, she was institutionalized following an auditory breakdown. She was reported to be singing in her sleep. Always the same melody, always off-key. As for Coldwater Reach itself, there is no GPS tag, no visible structure on modern satellite maps. But in aerial thermal scans taken in 2012, near what was once Wexley Moor, a strange heat signature was captured. It wasn't a building, it was a pattern, thread-like, circular, moving, and at its center, nothing, only silence, measured, recorded, and confirmed. Total sound deprivation at the geographic heart. When asked for analysis, the technician simply wrote, "If something is speaking, it's no longer using air." Today, all that remains are fragments. A doll's foot in a parish chest, a stitched glove on display in a folklore museum mislabeled as mourning artifact, children's songs with no origin, a seam that appears in the foundation of homes built near Wexley, but not in the architectural blueprints, and an unease, spoken only in very quiet corners of old libraries, when the fog thickens and the wind begins to hum without moving the trees. Because some say the work was never finished, some say Evelyn still dreams, and others say she stopped dreaming a long time ago and started listening instead.